Hello everybody. My idea for this YouTube channel is that I'm going to be taping episodes in which I look at things that are going on in the world right now through the lens of my last book, The Laws of Human Nature. So for instance, I'm going to do an episode, perhaps the next one, on irrationality, on the kind of plague of irrationality that I see that is consuming particularly the United States right now. I will do another one on narcissism, on the signs of rampant narcissism in our culture. Another one on the shadow side, which is an important chapter in the book, the dark side of human nature, which we see a lot of right now. Another one on envy and social media. Another one on group conformity. Something about leadership on the chapter that I wrote about authority. But today I want to talk about law number 17, a very important chapter in the book. It basically says, seize the historical moment. I don't know if you can see that. The law of generational myopia. And I want to look at this chapter through the lens initially of Machiavelli. And so these are sort of the books that I'm going to be using the most today. Of course, The Prince, which I read originally in Italian, which was very difficult, but I tried. I managed. My Machiavelli reader, which includes my three favorite books of his, The Prince, The Discourses, and the Florentine Histories. And this is the book of my favorite Machiavelli scholar who's alive now, the great Harvey Mansfield, and this is a wonderful book, Machiavelli's Virtue. And another book that has nothing to do with Machiavelli that inspired a lot my writing in Law Chapter 17 is this book called Generations, which I highly recommend, a fascinating book. And the idea behind the chapter is that there is what we call a zeitgeist, a spirit of the times, a kind of personality of the period that we are living through. And this personality, the zeitgeist, is very difficult to see in the present moment. But if you go back 50 years ago, you can start to see it. So for instance, obviously in the 1970s, we can notice the fashions, the bell bottoms, the weird hair, the funny shirts that men were wearing, the music, the food, etc., and the politics. We can notice a kind of personality that we can say that is the 70s, a kind of flavor. And obviously we notice it in the 80s with the yuppies and the Reagan years. And perhaps we can notice it as well in the 90s with the grunge era and Clinton and all the little things going on. But as you get closer to the present, it gets harder and harder to see. So what exactly characterized the 2000s or the decade that we've just gone through? When you're living in the present moment, you can't really see what's going on. You don't have a real feel for the zeitgeist because it surrounds you. It's too immediate. It's too in your face. You need the perspective of time. So I want to look at what's happening right now in 2020, because this is actually a very weird time, in case you haven't noticed, with all kinds of strange things going on. What is it that we're living through right now? What is the spirit of these times? What is the zeitgeist? Obviously, in 50 years, we will have a clear idea of what we've just gone through, but right now it's hard to see. So I want to attempt to take a bird's eye viewpoint of what we're going through right now through the lens of all the history that I have read over the course of many years. I want to do this through the lens of Machiavelli, because Machiavelli discussed this phenomenon of the cycles of history in a manner that I think is really fascinating. Now, you may not know this, but Machiavelli was obsessed with the origins, the beginnings of things, particularly the beginnings of cities, of governments, of nations, and of religions. And he had this belief that when things start out, when a government starts out, a new nation or whatever, things are very fresh and vibrant and alive. People have all sorts of very interesting creative ideas. The culture is very dynamic. Change is constantly occurring, and the change is healthy, because he had this ideal that change is natural, it's part of nature, and to the degree that we accommodate ourselves to change in our institutions, we have a healthy world. So he examined the origins of all things, of cities, states, and religions, and he asked himself, what are the qualities that go into this? What creates this kind of newness? Why are some places able to start something new? what are the ingredients of this? This cycle of history is very natural and it's very organic. And for writing my book, in the particular chapter 17 that I was talking about earlier, I was very influenced by that book Generations that I showed you. And basically based on that book and my own analysis, we can break it down into cycles of 4 generations, a kind of continual pattern through history that is sort of this natural process that is fascinating to observe. So the first generation that comes after the kind of revolution that occurred is a generation that is trying to create a kind of order, to kind of consolidate the new order that has been created and create kind of power and structure and sort of consolidate all the gains that have been happened and create a kind of more order and rules and laws to sort of make sure that the revolution can last, or the new order can last. Then the next generation comes up in which they're starting to drift further and further apart from the origins. And their idea is to hold on to everything other. They become more and more conservative. And it's less about the freshness and newness of the ideas and their being alive than about imitating the letter of the law as opposed to the spirit. And everything becomes about, we have to enforce certain laws. We have to create very rigid codes of behavior that are based on the origins, but then have lost the spirit of it. And things become kind of tight and rigid and controlled. And then comes the third generation, which we will call the crisis generation, in which things start to really fall apart. And people have drifted so far from the origins that they no longer have a sense of the original purpose and meaning of what unified the group, of why why the new order was created in the first place. And we see more and more cliques and factions, and the whole thing starts splintering up, and a kind of group madness starts to take hold, and things get so disjointed and disconnected and fall apart so much that a new generation arises, as we mentioned before, that wipes the whole slate clean, the revolutionary generation, and creates a space for something new to emerge. And then the whole cycle repeats again. Another generation comes that tries to consolidate it, then another one that tries to hold on and make things more rigid, then the crisis, then another revolution, on and on and on. And what basically spurs this revolutionary generation is youth, is young people, because they enter a world in which everything has been formed well before they were born, and they yearn for something new and fresh, something that reflects their reality. And they're disgusted with the old order of things, which leaves them no room, no space for creating something that is more relevant to their circumstances, to the changing times. And they're the engine that drives this revolutionary force that creates that fourth generation. Now this cycles that we're talking about is almost natural and organic. And what I mean by that is the human spirit constantly is in need of renewing itself. We can't stand when things get so rigid and tight, when things start to fall apart, when the old order becomes so corrupt and distanced from everyday people and everyday realities, that it's natural that we feel the need to completely wipe the slate clean. And so Machiavelli analyzed this with various cultures, particularly ancient Rome, that he was fascinated with the Republic of Rome. But he also did this with the Republic of Florence, which was founded in the 12th century. Most people don't know about the Republic of Florence, but it was one of the most exciting experiments in democracy in history. And they basically created an incredibly vibrant form of representative democracy known as the Republic of Florence. And Machiavelli himself had grown up in Florence. But what happened was the Medicis took it over in the 15th century, and they kind of changed the Republic into something that was more suited toward kind of autocratic rule. They perverted the values. And so Machiavelli was very close to this phenomenon. But what's very interesting is that it not only applies to politics, but it also applies to anything new, to an art movement or to religions. So I study a lot about Buddhism and the history of Buddhism. And in Buddhism, they have this concept of the 3 ages of Dharma. And Dharma basically means the law. The law is something that encompasses all of reality, that is the source of everything that occurs in the universe. And knowing this Dharma, knowing this law, can lead you to enlightenment. And they're called the 3 ages. The first age is the Dharma of enlightenment, where people are suddenly aware of the path towards enlightenment. And they're great teachers, and it's all very vibrant and fresh and alive. And the religion kind of expands. And then comes the second age, the Dharma of imitation, where people are starting to drift away from the original idea, and it's all about imitating the ideas of the earlier generations. And so it slowly becomes deader and deader and deader until there's the third age, the age of the degenerate Dharma, in which things are so corrupt, where people start creating their own ideas about what enlightenment or what religion means. We can notice this phenomenon in Christianity and all kinds of other religions. And in Buddhism, there's a constant movement towards refreshing, towards getting rid of this, to having new kind of revolutions. One was started by Zen, but even within Zen, there were all these other new kind of movements to kind of revive the belief system. So this is something that is very organic and very natural. Now, when I first read this idea of Machiavelli, an image came to my mind, an image that I remember very well now. It's a little bit hard to explain because it's visual, but I'll try to explain it a little bit. I saw it as the kind of building of a house. So you have this house, land has to be cleared in order to build a house. The swamp has to be cleared out, of the forest, and now there's a space to build a house or a tower or whatever kind of building. And so then a foundation is laid, and this sort of beautiful house starts to arise, and it gets taller and taller and taller. But then the inhabitants of this house start to forget about the foundation, about the land around it. They just are sort of enamored with the house itself. And the sort of the swamp starts to return, the forest returns, and the structure of the house starts to rot from within, decay, because nobody's really taking care of it. So from the outside, the house looks great, but from the inside, the structure of it is rotting and decaying from mold or from termites or whatever. And then a point is reached where the whole house collapses. And so I sort of see the process that happens in a decaying kind of order as this house that looks great on the outside. And this could be the United States right now. It could be our institutions. But from the inside, everything is rotting and decaying and falling apart. And we're not really aware of it until it becomes so evident that we realize something has to be changed. And so in my looking over this process of generations phenomenon, I'm particularly fascinated by the crisis generation. Maybe it's something about a dark side of my own nature, but this is the darkest period in any kind of historical moment. It's what is known as the Troubles in Russian history, and we see it in Europe on many occasions. And in such a period, people are starting to have lost a general sense of the purpose or the meaning of the country or state or religion that they live in. And it's related to something, to basic human psychology. And the idea is that we humans have a tremendous need to believe in something larger than ourselves, to believe in a kind of purpose for our individual existence and for our collective existence. We're a social animal. And so in book Mastering, in this book, I talk about the importance for an individual to have a deep and profound connection to their own sense of calling, to their own kind of life's tasks that guide them through life. But a collective, a society, also needs that kind of sense of purpose, that we are united around a particular ideal and that this is what's guiding us. And there's something higher than just our individual existences. But when this idea, this purpose, starts to fritter away and people lose it, a kind of collective madness ensues. People go nuts. They go literally crazy. And we notice all kinds of symptoms of this madness. So, for instance, there becomes a sort of knee-jerk patriotism, this kind of parroting of ideas that maybe were fresh in the very beginning, but they've all become sort of dead, and it all becomes just about believing so strongly in patriotism, in the nation, in the religion, but it has no spirit behind it. There's no freshness, there's no new ideas. It's just about mimicking and imitating the values that people are trying to promote. Then we see the creation of all kinds of cliques and factions, and each little faction seems to have its own little interpretation of what is really going on in the world, a kind of narrow viewpoint of reality. And this gives the group that belongs to the faction a sense of its own cohesion and its own unity and its own purpose. But it's all very false because it's based on a very, very narrow interpretation of history, a very narrow interpretation of what's going on. It's not connected to the overall picture. It's not connected to the group as a whole. We also notice all kinds of conspiracy theories starting to sprout up like mushrooms, where people, instead of seeing the connections, that all the little dots that connect about what is happening in the world, they create their own kind of connections in a kind of group paranoia. And so conspiracy theories become very popular in moments like this. People could become divorced from any kind of historical context. They imagine that what's happening in the world is just something new and never happened before. So for instance, if you have no understanding of the history of the races in the United States, of what it was like to be black in the 30s and 40s and 50s, and the intense racism that was existing at that time, you can imagine now in the present that things are fine, that, actually we've made so much progress and that people are just complaining for no reason. So a lot of people are kind of divorced from the historical context, and it leads to this kind of insane reasoning process. The same thing happens with beliefs in technology, as if the phrase is, this time it's different. So it's different now with the internet. It's different now with social media. This has never happened before. But these kinds of things, it always seems like it's different. These kind of bubbles and these beliefs in technology, this kind of religious fervor towards new forms of technology have existed many times before. But if you have no historical context, if you're divorced from the past, then you think everything is new, everything is exciting, and the present just is what it is, as opposed to a long stream of events that occurred to lead to this present moment. Another thing that happens is that all kinds of contradictions start to emerge from within. So people are trying to promote freedom and diversity, and yet they want to tamp down anybody who might disagree with them. A complete walking contradiction. The belief in freedom and celebrating diversity, but shutting up anybody who might possibly disagree. The contradiction is so obvious, but people can't notice it in these times. And when things get so chaotic and so disjointed, also emerge, just like mushrooms as before, con artists and demagogues and all kinds of weird gurus who are going to fill the emptiness that people are feeling with all kinds of new belief systems and new kinds of religions and cults. And the leaders that emerge, the con artist leaders that emerge, aren't really connected to any kind of ideas. It's really just about power itself and naked self-interest. So these are the kind of qualities that emerge in this crisis generation. And what happens is, it's almost as if people are haunted by ghosts of the past. We feel the past weighing us down, and we don't even have the room to create anything present and alive in the moment. But then, as I said before, a new generation emerges that is deeply frustrated by these circumstances, that feels completely alienated, that nothing is serving the world that they're inheriting, and they're so disgusted and upset with this that they want something new, and it just takes some kind of little spark, some sort of little incident, just as occurred in the French Revolution in 1789, to spark the new movement. And then the wheels start turning again and again and again and again. And finally, an idea for creating some space from going back, and a vision of reality that encompasses everything, and a sense of necessity takes over, and the whole cycle repeats itself. So this is kind of the bird's eye view that I wanted to give you. Clearly, what I'm trying to say is we have been going through the classic crisis generation, the most troubling, the most chaotic, and the most difficult to pass through. But as they say, it is darkest before dawn. So we're on the cusp, I believe, of the revolutionary generation, which is the most exciting time to be alive, really. It's the most exciting time to witness the changes that are going to occur, that are coming up from the bottom, not from the top down, but from the bottom up. And so what must happen is, what should our attitude be towards these circumstances that are occurring? First of all, some people might be upset by it. Some people like the past. They don't like change. They don't want something new to happen. But you must understand that it's inevitable, that it's part of the human spirit, that it has to happen, and that resisting it won't lead to anything because it's going to happen anyway. The second thing is, older people of older generations like myself, I particularly belong to the very end of the boomer generation, what is known as the Generation Jones, which are kind of more formed by the Watergate era and punk rock in the 70s sort of thing. I'm more of that generation. But even for boomers and older, you must try to embrace what's going on right now, because this is a phenomenon that not only happens to the whole society and the whole culture, but it also happens to individuals. So when we're young, when we're in our teens or 20s, we have this we're closer to our own origins. We have mental space. We're open to all kinds of new ideas. We have that own kind of dynamism as an individual. We're also connected to our own sense of purpose, to what's going on in life. And we feel that necessity, that energy, that urgency to get things done, to build things, to create things. But as we get older, just like cities and towns and religions, we drift further and further and further away from our own origins. We become rigid and conventional in our ideas and our belief systems, and we sort of lose that initial spirit. So we must look at the younger generations that are creating this from the bottom up as something exciting, a way to kind of revive our own spirit, and we must applaud it, and we must accept it as much as we can. Then the last thing I want to talk about are what is the approach towards this change? What are the strategies that must be enacted to make it happen? Well, I've kind of sort of alluded to that earlier, but the first thing is you have to be able to create space. And what that means is your tendency is to look at the world and to imagine that this is the only way things can be. This is the only way politics and institutions can be structured and organized. This is the only way that we can have order in the world. But there are actually other ways of imagining. We can imagine other forms of politics, other ways of human beings living with one another, other ways of creating new relationships. And so it's not creating space in the sense of wiping out territory and creating land to build on. It's creating psychological space where we can literally get rid of the past. We can say we don't want this anymore. In several of my books, I know the language is a bit harsh, but I call it we have to kill the father figure. We have to slay the father. That's law of never step into a great man's shoes in the 48 laws of power. In the 33 strategies of war, it's do not fight the last battle. In mastery, I talk about the apprenticeship phase and how you have to eventually get rid of the master who taught you, and how Mozart had to do that with his father. In the laws of human nature, I talk about this over and over and over again. You were weighed down by the past, by all the rules and the rigidities, and you have to create space and imagine something completely different and something completely new. And you must not be afraid of that, and you must give complete rein to your imagination. The second thing is also about that totality. Now, people might misunderstand that. I'm not talking about a kind of totalitarian spirit where everybody must rigidly believe in the same thing. What I mean by the totality is there's a vision, there is an idea of reality. This is what's really going on in the world right now. And it's hard for us to ever really know what's going on in the world in the present moment. But it touches all aspects of our life. Everything that occurs. Everything in politics and entertainment, in the arts, in the sciences, they're all connected because there's one kind of human spirit, a zeitgeist that encompasses the whole thing. And so a realistic attitude sees all of the picture and understands the connections. It's not just a narrow little viewpoint from academia, a narrow little viewpoint from the news media, a narrow little viewpoint from social media, each person having a little kind of narrow take on what is happening in the world. No, this encompasses everything going on, all the structures, all the whole reality that encompasses the zeitgeist, the spirit of the times that we're living in. And to the ability that you can understand these structures of what ties it all together, you have the power to change it and to create a more unified movement. Because change and movement and revolutions occur, it's a numbers game, basically. The more people that are involved, the more the masses are encompassed in it and feel excited and involved, the more momentum you will generate. And so you want to encompass a vision that everybody will want to join, but that is connected to all aspects of what is going on in the world, and not just have these narrow little viewpoints. And that is a focus of actually connecting yourself to the realities that are going on. The third part is the necessity, which is extremely important. You have to feel that creating this change is so vital and so necessary that if another year goes by with the old order of things, we're all going to perish, that the environment is going to fall apart, that things are going to get worse and worse, the troubles that I talked about, the confusion, the little cliques and factions, the conspiracies, the rampant irrationality, will reach such a point that we'll all just vomit and we can't live anymore and we'll suffocate. And so you have to feel the necessity for this. It has to impel your energy and your movement every single day. Because creating this kind of change, it's not an intellectual thing, it's more of an emotional matter. It comes from a sense of disgust and anger. The next thing you must do is, going back to that image of the house, where everything kind of looks good on the outside, the facade, but it's kind of rotting from within. It's kind of, some people have called that sort of a public secret. We all kind of know that things are rotting from within, but nobody's really paying attention to that. you have to publicize this. You have to make this as visible as possible. You have to show to the world the actual state of decline, the actual ridiculous disparities in wealth and power that exist in the world. And one thing that Machiavelli discussed, and I've learned in my studies of history, that periods in which there are these incredible disparities in inequality of wealth and power are the most decadent periods of history. They are the forerunners of a great collapse that is inevitable. It is the end of some kind of empire, whether it's the Roman Empire or it's the American Empire. And so the last thing is you must be aware of the three greatest dangers that you face in any kind of mass movement for change. The first one is entropy. Energy will start to flag. The thing that sparked this idea will start growing and distant, and weeks and months will go by. And it's a natural thing. People start losing that sense of necessity that impelled them in the beginning. And as the energy starts to flag, the second great danger will occur, which all kinds of cliques and factions will start to emerge from the movement itself. And each one will start to maintain its own little version of what's going on, its own little version of what is necessary. And once factions and cliques start to happen, it starts to create a momentum where more and more splintering occurs, and there's all kinds of infighting. So you have to not let the energy flag, and you have to be vigilant that this kind of factionalizing and splintering doesn't occur, which is the importance of having this kind of unified vision of what is really going on in the world. And the third great danger is the reaction. Whenever there's a great movement for change, it inevitably creates an incredible counter-reaction, where people who are upset by this, who want to hold on to the old order, start organizing themselves, and they create a whole kind of counter-movement to bring this to a halt. And these are very powerful. And you notice this in all kind of great sweeping historical moments. It's most obvious in the French Revolution, where you had this revolution that was very unbelievable moment, toppling 800 years of an aristocratic structure. And then suddenly the terror that occurs, and it starts to fall apart. And then there comes Napoleon, who creates a kind of fake version of the revolution. And then Napoleon is gotten rid of. And they actually bring back the king himself, the Bourbon monarchy. And so the reaction is going to be forming just in this moment. People are already organizing in a way that's going to try and halt any kind of change, because there's always people who hate change. And you must prepare for this, and you must strategize against it. So those are kind of how I look at the zeitgeist, what's happening in the world now, through the lens of my books and through Machiavelli and through my reading of history. I hope you find this interesting. I hope you don't find it too challenging or too weird. But anyway, I encourage you to read that chapter in my book. And until I see you the next time and we discuss the great phenomenon of irrationality that is exploding in the world right now. Thank you very much.